Imagine a nation so deeply divided that the only way to settle its differences is to turn its guns on itself. It's the spring of 1861. The United States of America is less than a century old. The ink on the Constitution is, historically speaking, barely dry. Yet, the grand experiment of democracy is unraveling. In small farming towns and bustling northern cities, brothers are quite literally preparing to shoot at brothers. Friends who trained side by side at the West Point Military Academy are tearing the insignias off their uniforms, choosing to fight for opposing flags. This wasn't a foreign invasion. This was an implosion. Over the next 4 years, more than 620,000 Americans would die. To put that in perspective, that is more American casualties than in World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War combined. It was a conflict that introduced the horrors of modern warfare, yet was fought with the outdated, romanticized tactics of the past. Welcome to the American Civil War, the bloodiest chapter in American history, and the crucible that forged the modern United States. But how did it come to this? How does a country just snap? It's tempting to think that the Civil War started overnight. It didn't. The gunpowder had been piling up for decades. It just took a specific spark to light it. For the first half of the 19th century, the North and the South had been growing into two entirely different worlds. The North was industrializing. Factories were booming, railroads were crisscrossing the landscape, and immigrants were flooding into northern ports seeking a new life. The South, however, remained profoundly agrarian. Its economy was an empire built on a single, highly lucrative crop: cotton. And that empire was entirely dependent on one brutal, horrific institution: the enslavement of millions of African Americans. As the United States expanded westward, acquiring massive new territories, the central, burning question became, will these new states be free, or will they be slave states? Politicians tried to put bandages on a gaping wound through a series of compromises. But you cannot compromise on human freedom. The tensions escalated. You had the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which opened the eyes of Northerners to the brutal reality of slavery. You had Bleeding Kansas, a mini-civil war out west. And you had the radical abolitionist John Brown, who tried to start an armed slave revolt in Virginia in 1859. Then came the election of 1860. A tall, gangly, self-taught lawyer from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln won the presidency. Lincoln's Republican Party was explicitly anti-slavery in its expansion. For the southern states, this was the final straw. They believed their economy, their culture, and their wealth were under direct threat. Before Lincoln even took the oath of office, South Carolina seceded from the Union. Soon, 10 other states followed, forming the Confederate States of America. The stage was set. The tragedy was about to begin. In April 1861, Confederate artillery opened fire on Fort Sumter, a federal outpost in South Carolina. The war was officially on. But here's the crazy part. Almost everyone thought it would be over in a few weeks. When the first major land battle took place at Bull Run, just miles from Washington, D.C., civilians actually rode out in carriages with picnic baskets to watch the fighting. They thought it would be a grand, bloodless spectacle. They were wrong. Bull Run was a chaotic bloodbath, ending in a panicked Union retreat. The picnic was over. Both sides suddenly realized they were in for a long, grueling nightmare. Why was this war so incredibly deadly? It came down to a lethal mismatch between technology and tactics. Military commanders were still using Napoleonic tactics, marching men shoulder to shoulder in tight, neat formations across open fields. But the weapons had changed. Soldiers were now equipped with rifled muskets that fired mini-balls, a conical lead bullet that expanded upon firing, catching the grooves inside the barrel. Instead of being accurate to 50 yards, these new rifles could shatter a man's bone from 300 yards away. Marching in a tight formation against these weapons wasn't a tactical maneuver. It was suicide. Furthermore, this was the first truly industrialized war. Railroads moved massive armies across the continent in days instead of months. The telegraph allowed generals and the president to communicate in real time. Ironclad warships replaced wooden sailing vessels, changing naval warfare forever. The Civil War was a glimpse into the mechanized slaughter of the 20th century. By 1862, the war was going poorly for the North in the Eastern Theater. The Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, led by the brilliant tactician General Robert E. Lee, was running circles around Union generals. Lee decided to take a gamble and invade the North. This culminated in the Battle of Antietam in Maryland on September 17, 1862. It remains the single bloodiest day in American military history. In just 12 hours, 23,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing. Tactically, it was a draw, but Lee was forced to retreat. And this gave President Lincoln the political victory he needed for a masterstroke. 5 days after Antietam, Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. This was a turning point. Initially, the North was fighting simply to preserve the Union. But with the proclamation, the war transformed. It became a moral crusade to destroy slavery. This completely shifted the global perspective. European powers like Britain and France, who relied on Southern cotton and were considering recognizing the Confederacy, backed away. They could not politically support a nation fighting to preserve slavery against a nation fighting to end it. Furthermore, it allowed nearly 200,000 black men to enlist in the Union Army and Navy, fighting with incredible bravery for the liberation of their people. The summer of 1863 was the turning point. In July, Robert E. Lee gambled again, invading Pennsylvania. Over 3 sweltering days, the two massive armies collided at a small crossroads town called Gettysburg. The battle culminated in Pickett's charge, a doomed Confederate assault across an open mile of ground. The Confederate Army was shattered and retreated, never to invade the North again. Simultaneously, 1,000 miles away, Union General Ulysses S. Grant captured the fortress city of Vicksburg on the Mississippi River. This split the Confederacy in half, severing their supply lines. Lincoln finally had a general who would fight relentlessly. Grant understood that the North had a massive advantage in manpower and industry. He initiated a war of attrition, grinding Lee's army down in a series of bloody, continuous battles in Virginia. Meanwhile, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman unleashed total war. He captured Atlanta and then marched his army 300 miles to the sea, destroying railroads, burning crops, and wrecking the infrastructure of the South. The goal was no longer just to defeat the enemy's army, but to break the enemy's will to fight. By April 1865, the Confederate capital of Richmond had fallen. Robert E. Lee's army was starving and surrounded. On April 9th, in the parlor of a small brick house in Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, Lee surrendered to Grant. The war was effectively over, but the relief was short-lived. Just 5 days later, President Lincoln was assassinated by a Confederate sympathizer, robbing the nation of the leader it desperately needed for the difficult peace that followed. The American Civil War ended slavery and preserved the United States as a single entity. The country went from a plural, the United States are, to a singular, the United States is. But the cost was unfathomable. The scars of the war, questions of racial equality, state power versus federal authority, and the legacy of the Confederacy did not disappear when the guns went silent. In many ways, they still echo in American politics and society today. It was a war that proved democracy could survive its ultimate stress test, but only through a baptism of fire and blood. Thanks for watching. If you want to dive deeper into the specific battles, the brilliant minds of the generals, or the incredible stories of the ordinary soldiers, hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments. What part of the Civil War should we cover next? Until next time, history is always unfolding.